how in the world do you get rid of your dark thoughts? But not only that, how do we begin to fill your mind with what you actually want instead? And as simple as this conversation is, this is by far one of the most important conversations we can have.
You have wondered what you would be able to do if you were the ultimate version of you, right? You would then have an easy time creating what you want, and yes, effortlessly enjoying life too. Now, you may know this already, the influence you have over your reality is far beyond what you've been told. Soon, you realize that your outer world is merely a mirror of your inner world, and we're here to connect the dots for you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to GODMODE.
Well, welcome back to GODMODE.
Yes, welcome back. So we had a great time spending some days and evenings with our good friend David Morehouse last week. That was something special, wasn't it?
That dude's amazing. We love you, David.
He's really wonderful at what he does, and there's a lot of knowledge that he has that I think people can't even fathom. And today I think we got to bring
it was hard for me to fathom at times.
It's
like, whoa.
It's like, well, quantum entanglement on the 8th dimension, the way it works, I'm like, oh gosh, I need a nap.
Yeah, it was actually the way he talks about it, because he gives you so many contexts, it's easy for you to really get it, right?
True.
Where he's not just going straight for it. There's a contextual way of teaching.
He is a great trainer, to your point. I think I was just overstimulated by the amount of knowledge that he had to give in so many different areas, because he was educating me earlier in the day on energy in the world. And then, he brought up some of his war stories from back in the day. And then we went to quantum entanglement. And I was like, I am all over the place with stimulation.
Yeah. He's like, well, your heart field, you have an eminent heart field. You can sense that about 2.5 feet out. I'm like, bro, what? And he's like, and then I was setting up the machine gun position above the kill box. And I was like, how did we get here?
Yeah, depth of knowledge. Very intriguing,
Fascinating guy. Seriously.
Yeah, I love him. There's so many interesting things that we picked up over the week, right? Working with David. He's coming back because he's going to be teaching the course. Something that I want to bring up in this very episode, I think this is the episode for everyone to listen to. How do we get rid of our dark thoughts? How do we actually get rid of our dark thoughts? Listen, we've all had those thoughts. We've all had, evenings or during the day where we're thinking about things and we're like, why are we thinking about this, right? Now, I'll give you two basic categories of how this happened. One is an external, one is an internal trigger. An external trigger might be like you watched a movie, you played a video game, you had a conversation, you heard a story, and you're like, oh my gosh, right? And maybe you watched a horror movie, and then you couldn't sleep. And the dark thought wasn't towards anyone else but yourself. And you're like, I don't want this, I don't want that, I don't want this. And you creeped out.
Spooky guy in the mask is going to break into my house and eat me.
And you couldn't turn off the light because you're all freaked out. And then you're like, well, if I don't turn off the light, they're going to see that I'm inside. Then I should turn off the light.
William's like, this actually happens in my house a little bit.
So what do you do, right? And then the other one is internal. Is that out of the blue, or maybe it's a gradual thing due to stress, due to anxiety, due to whatever that's going on in your life, something inside surfaces. And you're like, I'm feeling kind of down, or I'm feeling this, or you thought about a past breakup or a old trauma, and all of a sudden you're all worked up about it. And those dark thoughts wouldn't leave, and you want it to leave, but part of you don't want it to leave. So you're marinating yourself in this awful pool of negative thoughts. So how do you get rid of them? And these are just very basic examples. I mean, and everything in between and beyond, right? From people getting divorced, having a breakup, to people who just lost someone they love. Why is this happening to, this person? Or getting fired from a job, wanting to fire someone from a job, to who knows what's going on in the world right now, right? There are plenty of things for you to look around and be like, have a dark thought. this is an interesting time to be alive because we are oftentimes stimulated by the media around us and the news and the things that are going on. So not only to mention the things that are going on inside and outside of our own personal life, but the world. So all of a sudden you're dealing with billions of people's issues. All of a sudden you're dealing with billions of people's issues in one go. All you have to do is turn on your phone. So this episode, welcome back, gentlemen. We're going to be talking about how in the world do you get rid of your dark thoughts, but not only that, how do we begin to fill your mind with what you actually want instead? And as simple as this conversation is, this is by far one of the most important conversations we can have.
David mentioned this when we talked with him last week. The brain is able to process faster than a supercomputer. In fact, thought can occur at the speed of light, which is
faster
than it, which is insane. Because what you set that framework and they go, okay, well, what if I have a bad thought? Like, what if I was confronted with some information about how crappy things are going at the south border, which is a real thing. Or there's an update from Gaza.
And the north border.
Yeah, and apparently they're sneaking in through Canada,
Yeah.
But they came down with maple syrup, so it's whatever. There's a war in Gaza. There's a war in Ukraine. There are political turmoils. The Democratic Party still is not clear on who they're promoting. Do we want senile Joe in the office for another 4 years when he can't pass a cognitive test? Lots of things. So then if you're entertaining those, your brain's ability to process faster than the speed of light will sit there. And I've experienced this before. There was a breakup. I'm like, oh, she's with somebody else. Or it was family trauma. And it's like, oh, like what's happening? Why did this person leave? It could be a million things. And some people have that fixation, or they'll sit there and ruminate. And if it's happening faster than the speed of light, you can invent a lot of really horrific stuff in your head.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And then so what are the processes, right? That's what we're about on God Mode, is we're going to give you tools and mechanisms. And here's this approach and here's this hack, write it down, because you can liberate yourself from spiraling in a dark place. You can put a pin in it. And one of the ways to do that David talked about, and we'll just explore a few here, is you have to talk about it with someone. You are taking an abstraction, your thoughts, which is kind of 4D, or fourth dimension. I mean, it's an abstract thing, and you are putting a pin into it and forcing it into 2D, 3D reality. Maybe you write it down. This is how I'm feeling. Now you're able to look at it and go, okay, well now it's not, I've stopped the 3D printer of my brain creating chaos and pain for me. I've written it down. I've encapsulated it a little bit. So then what do you do from there?
So in mental programming, there's a specific term that we call this process. We call it nominalization. So as we nominalize something, we're basically making it a noun. It goes from a verb to a noun. So it stops the motion. And when it stops the motion, it stops the emotion. So you actually can extract the emotion and the message so that the noun ceases to have those meanings, those emotional meanings.
And why that's important for someone that wants to remove their bad thoughts. Because I might take the standpoint that I don't think it's totally possible to remove all bad thoughts. I think it is possible to learn how to disengage from the feeling that makes it bad for you. Because bad, good, it's going to be subjective. Right or wrong, they're going to be subjective. How someone feels about it, the charge towards the thought is really what you care about. So why that process, why someone would want to learn that is because how am I feeling about the thought is more important than the actual context of the thought.
Something to consider for the audience is that everything in this room, everything in your environment right now was once a thought. Every piece of clothing, including you, were once a thought, but now physical, right? It starts somewhere in a world that we could call it the mental, the spiritual world. And that world begins to bring into the physical things that have been repeatedly thought about, things that were intentionally and intensely focused on, and that there is a reasonable exchange of energy that causes this portal between the mental or the world of the mind and thoughts and emotions and the physical world. So when we keep thinking about something and it's a negative spiraling thought, if we don't stop it and it gets more intense and it's repeating itself, and there's enough energy exchange, which is your negative emotion in this case, or maybe you're taking action or doing something about it, all of that can cause a physical actualization, which may not be something you want. Now, on the flip side, what our friend David and us were talking about was how do we objectify or nominalize these words that describe how you feel inside that you don't like, whatever you don't like. And as you nominalize them or objectify them by writing it down, you're putting this thing in motion into a 2D-ish reality where it's just on a flat surface. You wrote it down.
Yeah.
And then you can extract all the emotions, you can extract the message, and then that word ceases to have meaning. And that actually gives you an inventory on what to resolve.
Yeah, it's not trivial. Like, oh, write it down. And someone goes, oh, I'll pass on that. What we're telling you is that if you've got this machine, which is your brain, and it's just printing and printing, constant chaos, the solution is to get out of your head and to get it written down. And if you can do that, you begin to start getting some semblance of control. There's so many people that feel that in this life that they have no control. And if you take that to its limit, so that concept pushed to the absolute maximum, you get people that experience thoughts that lead them to self-mutilation, right? I mean, or surgeries that don't serve them. They may have lingered on a thought for so long and then over time realized my head's a storm, I can't get out of it. And so they have to take action, like you said. And that can lead to some pretty not ideal results. Some of them you can't reverse, you know? And so being able to have your head be a landscape of discipline, it's not, I think you're right, where it's like, it's not, I don't think you can 100% do that, because I think there are the unconscious thoughts that emerge. I go, gosh, like, why am I thinking about that? That's so random. And then it's obvious to me where some other thoughts emerge. I'm like, oh, someone's shared this information with me, thus I had this response. Some are voluntary, some are involuntary. So I agree with you on that. But if your mind, if you cultivate it as a garden of discipline and you're constantly spending that time, which we do, it's a big focus of Upgrade, is calming yourself, having clarity on what it is you do want, so that all of your thoughts are not focused on inventing a whole bunch of awful stuff. You know, it goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very therapeutic exercise just to freeze it, right? It's like we're running this constant movie. There's all these different images running around, and each one of them are labeled by the word, the thought. And by taking the time to write it down on a piece of paper or using your phone even, just freezing it for a little bit, you stop, you hit play, or excuse me, you hit pause on whatever's going on. Because to your point earlier, the speed of the brain with all the thoughts, it's like, this movie's going so fast, just stop it, slow it down. And the reason why you would want to learn this skill, if you continuously have negative thoughts and you suppress the emotions enough, it will represent biologically in your body over time.
Yeah. Yeah. Go on that.
So, I mean, there's a lot of research on this. I would direct most people as a starting point to a book called The Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton, where he talks about how thoughts suppressed over time, negative emotions, can represent in our cells in different forms, cancer, Alzheimer's, etc. We're all safe and healthy.
That's right.
The point of that book and the light shined on that book is how powerful the thoughts are and the emotion attached to the thought and how the body simply just manifests things from there. So if you learn to detach the negative emotion, you begin to move into powerful emotions like love, peace, harmony, and those are radiating throughout the biology. Imagine what kind of feelings and what kind of, I mean, you walk into a room, we've all walked into a room, right? And you get a good vibe from someone. You're like, there's a good vibe about this person, right? What do you think is going on in their thought process that's able to radiate out there?
They're probably awesome.
Yeah. And we're energy. We're just feeling that frequency, the transmission vibrations through the air.
Yeah, the inverse of that is I know people that just suck the energy and the soul out of a room, and that person, you're saying there's a correlation between they could have unwanted health problems if this isn't saying that by maintaining a perfectly positive attitude, you will have mitigated 100% of all health problems. but I think it is saying that it's on average, it's going to skew much more in your favor.
Yeah, I mean, we're not doctors, but there's a reason they try placebos,
Totally.
right? There's
Yeah.
a reason they have placebo trials along with the actual controlled trial. They know the power of the mind.
Yeah, it's not, the correlation's not 0%.
Yeah.
Like no one can say that. Is it 1, right? We've talked about this before. It's like if it's 10% and you go, I can have a 10, that's why I take vitamins. I'm like, if I take something in the morning and I know I'm going to have 20% better like physical overall like wellness, I would do that. Oh, I'm not 200%ing it, but I don't care. I got 20% out of just taking these vitamins, and those compound over time. And so if you can do the same thing where you know that your brain and the thoughts that run through it are going to impact your body's health by, call it, let's be conservative and be like 10%. It'll have a 10% overall effect on the trajectory of your health and wellness. Yo, that's worth it. That is really worth exploring.
I also, if someone is struggling with negative thoughts, I do want to put this out there that, first of all, begin to give yourself some grace, self-acceptance. We've talked about this on prior episodes. It's an interesting time that we live in. The world, not going to say that there's, on things being done on purpose, but there are things that
Sure looks like it.
are being done in the background that are affecting our neurology, right? Certain things in education, certain things through media,
Diet.
through diet, the food, right? Good point on the
Water.
food. There's certain things that we got to begin to consider. Are these affecting me at a hormonal level, which is affecting my neurology and my biology at the same time? So if you are having negative thoughts out there, first of all, reach out to someone, listen to our podcast, reach out to us. We're here for you. You're not alone. But begin to give yourself some self-acceptance. There's nothing wrong with you, okay? Having bad thoughts does not make you wrong. It just means that you need to get some tools to help you with those negative thoughts.
Yeah, there's a cheat code to it for sure. When it comes to negative thoughts, it exists for a purpose. First off, how do we define a negative thoughts, right? Negative thought is oftentimes something that when you have that thought, if the thought were to be actualized in one way or another, it would cause harm, it would cause a problem, a conflict of some sort, something that generates negative interest in your life, right? Now, what's interesting is there's a cheat code to this. And the cheat code is very simple. The cheat code is for you to think about what there is to gain from this negative thought, this dark thought. Because when you uncover what's behind that, right? When you uncover there's something to gain. Because look, our neurology does not waste energy on things that actually have no gain. It understands and properly measures pros and cons. I want this, I don't want this. This is what I need. This is a reward. This is a punishment. There's gains. What kind of gain would you have if you were to have these dark thoughts? Well, your mind might say, and you need to ask these questions. Your mind may say, okay, because it will make me feel good, because it will do this, because it will allow me to advance in my life, because it will allow me to remove my obstacles, because this will allow me to have the dream life that I wanted. It always and usually, well, I'm going to say always and usually in a funny way, because it always has a positive intention, and it usually is the person doing the best they can with the resources they have. Not always. It's always got a positive intention behind any negative thought, but it usually, is the person doing the best they can with the resources they have. Well, the cheat code is right before our eyes. The resources we have is a perception thing.
Yeah, you were talking about that before we started, the identity.
Based on your identity, we limit and or we expand what we believe we have access to. And this understanding and awareness of what we have access to causes us to think, oh, I can't do this, or I can do this, right? And it expands all the way to all different areas of life. So if we were to go back to the topic of what there is to gain from a negative thought, the answer is really simple. Obviously, everyone's going to have a different answer. But if you were to ask a child why they were sick, a child could have 1,000 answers, and they could, right? There could be a lot of reasons. But once in a while, you may find a child that will tell you the truth, or I mean, maybe they all do, maybe they don't all do, right? But when they do tell the truth, sometimes you'll hear, because I don't want to go to school. I remember as a kid, I didn't want to go to school. At some point, I'm like, I'm going to get myself sick. The gain is so much greater than whatever it is that you need to do. You're like, I'll do it, right? So over time, as we become adults, we become more sophisticated in hiding the gains. And we're like, oh, it's not, I didn't intend for this to happen, right?
That's a trip.
And some people will do that at a micro scale. A lot of people do, right? They'll go to the grocery store and pick a package that is actually, not good. Maybe there's a rotten thing here and there. Unconsciously, they'll bring it home and they'll be like all pissed off. How could they sell me this? And the rest of the package is fine and they eat it. And then they go and return it and say, well, guess what? There's some moldy stuff. I got to return it, right?
Yeah.
People do that from a micro scale, and or divorces, relationship breakups. That happens oftentimes because there's a secondary gain too, which is what we were calling this. What there is to gain from the negative thing to macro stuff. What happens when the economy is so-called bad? What is there to gain? In the micro, we oftentimes look at our lives and our small behaviors and what we have gains, right? What we can do to gain. And oftentimes these dark thoughts actually is wanting us to get some sort of gain. There's some sort of gain there. And when it comes to the macro, it's the same thing. When there are dark thoughts or so-called dark events, there are some people to gain from this, right? And I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing or any of that. I'm not putting a label of those things on when there's a so-called dark thought. When you notice these dark thoughts in society, because if you observe what's going on around, there's war, there's so-called pandemic, there's political turmoil, there's immigration issues, there's healthcare issues, there's food issues, there's all kinds of issues all around the world, not just in the US, but literally everywhere there are issues. When there are issues, there are genuine human mistakes, of course, and there are also unconscious gains, something to gain that we mask with mistakes. To give you guys a very specific example, I remember observing a very behavior one time from an old friend. I noticed this friend, I noticed he complained about not having a lot of success. And I said, and you work really hard, I've noticed, and you don't like the level of success you're having? He's like, no. I feel like, this is just a hard world to be in. The economy's hard. The people are hard. And people just aren't honest, and they are not willing to work. And he just goes off. And I'm like, wow, you live in a terrible world. He's like, no, it's just what it is, right? And then I'm like, so you're working hard, but you're not getting a result, and that's what's causing you to have all these thoughts, right? He's like, basically, like if I'm being honest, yes, because I feel like life is unfair, right? I work so hard, but look at me, right? Look at what's going on. I'm like, what do you actually do? I decided, I'm going to ask some deeper questions and dig in. Like, what do you actually do? And he gives me his profession and what he does, which I already knew his profession, but wanted him to tell me. And I asked him, how is it different than all of the people that you went to college with? He's like, there's no difference. Like, I do the same thing as all of the friends I graduated with. Like, basically in the same class, we all do the same thing. And then I'm like, and are they happy? He's like, no. Some of them are having better success than I am, but they're not farther than me by that much. I'm like, so are you telling me if you somehow are not happy with it? He's like, no, I'm not just not happy. I feel like I failed. I'm like, okay. And he's like, I feel like my life is meaningless and I'm not contributing and I'm suffering because of it. And I think that the world's not fair and I'm being punished for being a hard worker that I am. I'm like, all of these programs are not actually true. But I said, let me break it down for you if that's okay. He said, yes, please.
I'm sure a lot of people have felt this way before too.
Yeah, definitely. Heck, I felt this way too.
Oh.
And I remember telling him, I'm like, you are doing what everyone else is doing that you graduated with, right? He's like, yes. I said, and if any of you fail, so-called failed, that you said, right? You labeled it failed. Is it that person's fault or is it nobody's fault? He's like, oh, of course it's nobody's fault. I'm like, that's where the problem is that you're wanting to do the same thing to minimize your risk because you think everyone else is doing it, therefore it must be safe. And if and when you fail, you don't blame yourself and you don't take responsibility because that's what everyone else is doing. So you shift that responsibility to the collective.
Yeah. To deviate is to take a whole different level of, oh, well, you screwed up because you didn't do what like you, when you were a missionary. You're like, oh, I can go knock door to door to door to door, or I can find a ping pong table, stick it out in the middle of the open and just challenge people to ping pong and make friends. You know, everyone's like, no, you got to knock, you got to tract. It's like, well, what if you changed it?
Yeah, I remember some people are like, you're supposed to do this because that's what everyone else is doing.
That's right.
And when they get home, they're tired. They feel like they got no success, but they're like, no, this is just the way it is. It's hard. Huh. I'm like, no, you idiot. You're not doing the work by using your brain. You could actually be thinking about what else you could do to make success happen. And I don't mean idiot in terms of they were actually idiots, but the behavior is idiotic, right? The behavior of copying a group of people who are not having massive success and thinking they're going to have massive success by doing what everyone else is doing. How many people in society today are doing what everyone else is doing, expecting massive success? And then having dark thoughts to punish themselves and their neighbors and their friends because they're like, oh my gosh, woe is me. I can't have massive success because I do what everyone else is doing, and what everyone else is doing is not having massive success, but for some reason I should have massive success.
Some people like it. So can you answer that? Because think about this. When people are going through a rough time, you know what they like to do? They like to put on a sad song. They want one that hurts them. Like they'll scrub back to that part, like, oh, this is the part right. Breakup song, right? Or I like to be mad at my boss. Some people enjoy that, living in that place. And so I don't know if that's because of a secondary gain, because maybe they're wanting to feel something. And so they will turn on that sad song and listen to it, or they will enjoy, they get pleasure out of some people really do, out of living in a negative place. And
my thought on that, It's an opinion. It's not proven, but it's an opinion. I've seen it over and over again, and I've looked at it and then even leveraged it to find solutions, and it worked for me and the people we've helped. What I've noticed is when people do that and they dig up these thoughts, they focus on those thoughts, and they marinate themselves in those thoughts, that immersive behavior is actually their mind's way of telling them, you need to take a look at this and you need to resolve this. But what they take it as is, oh, I just need to focus on the negative. But their mind's like, no, I'm showing you the issue. You need to solve it. And they're like, no, I just need to sob over this, right? But the mind's like, no, I need you to resolve this, right? I remember as a kid, I had some, I was applying to be an exchange student at one point. And then they were like, oh, your host family ended up moving, so last minute you can't go to this place. We might send you elsewhere. I'm like, where? They're like, we have no idea. I'm like, I don't like that answer. I was the first one to sign up in the world. You can't tell me this, right? I literally was that kid who was the first to sign up in the world. So I signed up a year before everyone else. You're telling me you couldn't do it because of what, right? They're like, oh, I'm sorry, just your family moved. Nothing we can do about it. Now I could sit back and sob or cry about it and say, oh, woe is me. I was like, nope, I'm going to take matter into my own hand. Who do I know that will be a host family for me? So I networked as a 16-year-old into finding my own host family, right? From a different country.
Of course he did.
And so found my own host family, and they happened to be in town across the globe. Right, I networked into it, and then they happened to be in town. We visited. They liked me. I liked them, And then I lived with them for like 10 months,
No kidding.
just like that, right? And that was a great time. Wonderful family, incredible people, loving, just like amazing people. And I remember I was given the advice. I was so worried. I had all these dark thoughts of how, if it didn't work out, how sad it would be. And it was like a dream of me to be an exchange student at that time. Because when you're young, when you're a teenager, an exposure to a completely different culture can change you forever.
Dude, absolutely.
Especially if you have a great family like the one I had. And so I wanted that to happen, but all my thoughts were like, well, you don't deserve it. You can't have this. What if it doesn't work out? Not everything works out. Things don't work out usually. And look at how hard your family's life is. Your life is going to be hard. All these thoughts started popping up, right? But some of those thoughts, if not a lot of those thoughts, were not my own thoughts. They were from, you call it epigenetics, you call it genetics, you call it whatever you call it, nurture versus nature. Regardless, I had those dark thoughts. But I was given a piece of advice at that time as a 16-year-old or 15-year-old. And the person said to me, you could sit there and worry all day or you can do something about it. Right? Something as simple as that. I was like, heck yeah, I'm going to do something about it. Right? And the mind's job when it gives us these dark thoughts, oftentimes is to tell us, go do something about it. Because we're, in the old days of supposedly, let's say we were, prehistoric time and we were hunting. And I can't verify what history is and what isn't, because who knows. But the truth is, let's say we were cavemans at one point, or let's say we were hunting, because that's definitely happened. Our ancestors were hunting. And if there was a threat, we wouldn't sit around and wait for the threat to arrive. Unlike modern humans, we could sit there and wait and cry about it. Our ancestors, if they were to sit there and cry, they'd be gone. If there was a lion, a bear, they'd be gone. They wouldn't be around to tell the story.
True.
So the mechanism of survival dictate that they take action. Nowadays, because the issues and the problems and the so-called dark thoughts, whatever caused it, is oftentimes not physical right at the moment, they feel like they can just sit around and think about it, cry about it with their friends. Nothing wrong with that either. But at one point, they must take action. And I think I'd like to give you guys some solutions, right? And we're going to give you guys some solutions on what to do when you have dark thoughts. But I think there are still more to be said about this topic, why it's happening and all that.
I think that's why it's important to understand the point about survival, how survival got us to a certain point. But where we're at in 2024, life is easy. We're not really in survival mode now.
We're chilling. We got electric cars, baby.
Yeah, you walk down and you don't kill. Most people don't hunt anymore. But there's still that very animalistic mind in the back that operates on fight or flee. So when those dark thoughts come up and you don't fight them, or you're not going to run from or fight or flee, but that's the trigger.
Yeah.
And you just want to sit there or maybe listen to a song because it's safer to listen to a song than to go into the shadows and do the dark work. That's where, as William was saying, and as when your younger years, you explained, you actually took the program, the choice that I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to learn. So you do have to push yourself past something that's uncomfortable. And that's where I feel like we're not teaching the proper mechanics of that at a younger age of how to, hey, this is how you deal with inner emotions. This is how you deal with your old evolutionary mind that's still running the show in the background, unfortunately. Because when people do things to hurt themselves, and I've done it myself, I'm sure you guys that sometimes we're doing those things, second gains to hurt ourselves, you could ask logically, are you logically trying to hurt yourself right now? You'd be like, no, of course not. Well, okay, well then there's an emotion that you need to learn from because this is your emotional mind doing this, right? I've asked this to friends who've had drug problems and alcohol problems. They're like, I just can't stop doing it. I just can't, I need it, right? But they know it's hurting them. And so logically, it's not like they're trying to hurt themselves.
Yeah.
But emotionally, they need to heal from something to stop the behavior.
Yeah, addiction is a sign of an unfulfilled emotional need being expressed via the addiction, right? But we can actually take the addictive personality, remove the negative emotions, resolve the emotional need by finding what that root cause is, and then applying that addictive personality onto something that actually is desirable to them, those people tend to be incredible entrepreneurs, investors, business owners. They just become symbols of success. But they've got to learn how to do the resolution, which we spend a great deal of time talking about, the resolution formula that we teach at Upgrade, because it's so important for people to resolve their stuff. And then beyond that, they need to be able to direct that personality, which actually is a huge advantage to have an addictive personality, but they have to use it in the places that will bring them benefits, real benefits, not fake ones.
Yeah, I mean, call that passion, right? Call that drive, purpose.
Oh, that's exactly it.
Like, I mean, people are like, oh, I can get addicted. It's like, awesome. So we know that you have some of the tools, part of the formula for creation. It's that you have the ability to be obsessed about something in a good way, right? Because there's obviously, in my opinion, there's viruses being planted out there, little seeds being planted out there, and it's possessing the mind in the wrong ways. We can go about that another conversation, but the point of this is with
the article you sent me.
yeah, the deep conversations that we're having here is like when you have a bad thought, it's like, okay, as William said, it wants you to learn from this thought. It wants you to get around it. And what's the formula there to next go? It's like, what do you want to create? What do you want to innovate in your life? What's the meaning behind it? How do you drive yourself to get there? How do you get yourself out of the dark thoughts?
Some people aren't ready to do that, but at some point you get so fed up with the spiral that if it's rock bottom, or the way to get out of it is those action steps, which, circling back to the very top of the show, action step 1 is you write it down. So it's like, that's the point, is we're illustrating that a lot of people will be in this typhoon and they're going, oh, maybe this is just how life is. Oh my gosh. But to get out of it is so much more fulfilling than staying in it. Even if that's what's familiar, it's the path of least resistance. If you don't put up a fight, you can sit there and toil. And yeah, it's going to be a bit of a swim to get to the net. But if you start taking those action steps, oh my gosh, you feel so much better. And that's the reality. It's like the second you do it, I'm done. I am now one step more closer to feeling better or whole. Well, I'm not bothered by these thoughts, or I reconciled them. And you do that by pinning it into your reality, writing it down or dictating it or putting it in notes. I've got so many rants on my phone. If you go through my voice memos, I just have rants and I just get them out because it's like a virus, right? Like you can get it out. And then the second thing, I like what you will do in trainings and live trainings is picking a spot and staring at it on the wall. Do you want to walk us through that and like why it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So, that exercise has to do with an alter state. And the alter state is the best place for us to communicate with our unconscious, to instruct our unconscious, to modify and optimize our unconscious. Well, the unconscious mind is where we store from our emotions to our memories to a lot of the programs that runs our health, our entire bodily system, to, frankly, anything. And it also contains the ability to weigh pros and cons. Now, before I share the exact practice, the pros and cons, which are pains or pleasures, are oftentimes not strong enough when the individuals feel like they're not ready to resolve it. So per what you were saying earlier, when someone's not ready, it simply means their pain is either not strong enough or their pleasure is not strong enough. And that's also because if you take it another step further, you'll notice, well, why would their pain or pleasure not be strong enough? If their pain's not strong enough, that might be because they've only experienced the pain for a certain time period or a certain level of intensity. If we were to predict that the pain will grow over time, then eventually they will be ready, right?
Just real quick, and also they could have outside influence being told, like say from a parental figure or a school figure, oh, that's just normal. So then they have a presupposition that pain level threshold is just normal.
It
so
runs
then
in
they'll
our
accept
family.
it.
We're all depressed.
Yeah.
Like, whoa.
Yeah.
So then they'll accept it and they'll stay there and be like, oh, this is
And they'll
normal.
stay their whole life just suffering, right?
Yeah.
Or at one point they're like, okay, I've had enough. I feel like these people who are no smarter than me seems to not be suffering. Why am I, right? And then the pleasure side, most people don't have enough pleasure anyway. They have no idea what it even feels like to have pleasures all the time. So a lot of people sedate themselves. They sedate themselves rather than actually seeking out real pleasures. So, or distract themselves. So finding real pleasure is incredibly important by design. And then not to mention most people don't live their lives by design because they're reacting rather than proactively designing and strategically moving towards. They're reacting. And there's no better ways to describe, unfortunately, I'm going to use this word, and it's pretty emotionally charged of a word historically, but this is not to describe specific groups of people. This is to describe people with this very behavior. People who are reactive or long-term reactive are simply slaves. Right? Because they're slavery to their own negative programming and or other people who knows how to leverage these negative emotional programs. And so all in all, I'm saying if they don't have a strong enough pain or pleasure, they may not ever change. So the way to mitigate that is to show them this pain and this pleasure ought to be rebalanced. You don't need to have this pain. Whoever told you pain, no gain, right? It may be out of context.
Embrace the suck.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that people won't experience pain or the suck. A lot of it is just that they didn't have proper feedback. Growing up, the parental figures or the schools or the teachers didn't teach them how to not experience pain by performing at the highest level, right? In all areas. Because someone could be really good over here, but terrible over here, they will still feel pain. So part of becoming a successful human being is to learn how to navigate across all these different areas of life and learning to master different areas of life. I mean, and that famous saying, Bruce Lee said, be like water. That was interesting, right? To think about how one can be so flexible, one can morph. And, we can go a lot deeper into that. But the point is, I remember thinking about how someone experienced pain. Everyone's got different thresholds, but that is to say most people are considering how much pain can I endure as I, achieve whatever I want to achieve. But that is absolutely the wrong question. That's a question that's born out of a century of war, if not multiple centuries of war and trauma. That's a population that's experienced tremendous amount of war and conflicts that would say, how much pain can I endure to achieve happiness? Whereas a population that is actually born out of euphoria, success, pure abundance, and if you could imagine this society where it's super advanced in all aspect, from technology to human relationships to who knows, right? And practices of society, that population would have a very different model, and they will likely ask how much pleasure can we endure? And they would rejoice with one another, not be jealous of one another. They would create so much pleasure that everyone would want to be drawn towards it. Majority of our news, frankly, our media tells us right now how much of our neurology responds to negative programming.
If it bleeds, it reads.
People respond to it because we have psychologically been programmed over the course of many wars and trauma and famine and who knows what. Over the ages, we become so aware of things that cause pain, rather than things that cause pleasure. We're gradually transitioning. That's the good news. If you watch, it is happening. It's absolutely happening. And so I think that if people want to get rid of their dark thoughts, the answer is actually really simple. And we're going to share with you that practice in a second. The answer is you need to design your life. Otherwise, you're just going to live out the old programs that have been passed down through these centuries of war, millennia of war. Yeah. It's time to design it and rewrite your life.
It's like shipping out in a boat. You left the rudder. You have no oars. It's like if you don't have a plan, it's just going to be adrift. And ultimately, you're going to go with someone that does have a plan. They're going to scoop you up. And that plan may not be your plan. And
Such a good analogy.
the design is really important. And you don't have to have everything clear, but if you have a few basic ideas, you'll be surprised once you sit down and go, oh man, I kind of don't even have a few basic ideas. I thought I did. I had like a general set. I had like a couple nouns. I wanted happy. I wanted sunshine, good food. But you're like, great, congrats, get your sunshine. What do you want specifically? Because you'll be amazed when you start opening those boxes. You're like, oh, I didn't really have much of a plan. And now I can. And then if you put that in there, in the unconscious mind, if it has somewhere it's finally wanting to go, oh my gosh, all of those toilings, all of those pains, like it can start to melt away because you now have new, better things to focus on, which is amazing. So to break out of that state, if someone is in that loop, the pain loop, and they want to have that thought, and they want to just ruminate on it, first thing is to write it down. Bring it into hard reality.
Objectify it, yeah. And then resolve it.
Yeah. Also, be aware of the things that you're distracting yourself with.
Great point.
I mean, like, if you're just going to sit around and, to your point, listen to the song, watch the movie, hang out with the people who are...
People turn to porn.
Porn.
You know what's even worse than porn? Nowadays, music. I'm not joking.
The lyrics?
Yeah, because I can't tell you how many times I turn on the radio or popular, like top 100, and they'll play a song of a girl singing or a guy singing, I don't know who they are, and they keep singing how they desire to kill themselves.
I've heard that in some songs.
Yeah, the embedded suggestions in lyrics are quite...
And they repeat 1,000 times. Think of how many people hear it, and then they're like, oh yeah, I do that. I want that. And you're like, no, you don't want that.
People are like, oh, the lyrics don't affect me. I just like the beat. That's not how that works. That's not what your brain does.
Yeah. Keeps you in that loop, that like feedback loop of like, it's right there in front of you. Like, but once you learn, but until you get it, you're going to keep going in that loop, and it's going to feel like you're on a hamster wheel.
For real.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know which one's worse, but those music is definitely being played everywhere. There's no age limit, right?
And the things that we lean on, to your point, substance abuse, that suppresses. I get it that it like, oh, I got to take away the, what is it they call it? I don't even know what the saying is.
Take off the edge.
Take off the edge of the work week. It's the weekend now. I got to take off the edge. Well, you're just trying to take off the edge of what, a negative emotion, a charge that you had towards your job, towards your life. That's what.
That is unresolved.
Like, does that sound like a good idea?
Well, when they don't have tools, right?
True.
That's why we access.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a criticism of where our society is right now, because we have all these pills, pornography, drinking, any kind of substances, whether
Even
they're illegal.
Video games.
But all it does is suppress. All it does is just distract them and keeps them in that middle zone of not enough pain or not enough pleasure. So if they're in that middle zone, they're not going to move.
They're sedated.
Yeah.
There's no great spikes anymore. It's just kind of a general blah.
Yeah.
All right, enough footsie. Tell us the second thing.
All right. So the technique is very simple. Are you talking about the technique? Okay, all right. The technique is very simple. And the technique allows you to get into a peripheral state, which also promotes parasympathetic functioning, which is the opposite of fight or flight. And it actually, your visual system is very correlated with how your body feels.
Your eyes are literally directly attached to your brain. Directly.
Literally.
Yeah. I mean, it's right behind it in everything you're taking in visually. This is why this is so powerful.
That's why one of the greatest revolutions in computing and in software is turning codes into graphical user interface. Well, most of us don't work with our own brain graphically or visually. We're just giving it commands that it doesn't understand. We need to translate that into visuals. So this technique allows you to tell your mind, hey, zoom out, expand your horizon, and relax. And your mind and body will literally do that immediately. It takes 10 seconds. So the simple technique is you imagine as you look up in front of you where the ceiling meets the wall. Imagine a dot. And this dot is big and it's black or whatever color you want. And it's big and it's right there and you stare right at that spot, but you allow your awareness to expand to 100 degrees, to 150, to 180 degrees, to 210 degrees, and beyond. And that awareness can expand while your eyes maintain that contact, staying focused on that spot. And then you can look back down. You'll notice you immediately calm down because you began to change from foveo, which we're so used to doing with our phones, just focusing on one small screen down below.
Good point.
To a peripheral vision, which actually expands and relaxes your horizon. The reason people have problems at the micro and the micro across all aspects of society, from financial problems to even wars, is because people are typically too narrow-sighted. They're thinking about now. They're really focused on the short term, right? I'm not saying all wars or all conflicts are happening because of people being short-sighted, but I'm saying a lot of them can be.
Definitely escalate for that way. You killed our guys, we'll kill your guys. It's like, great.
And so why do we share this technique? Because you can, without forcing any resolution or learning how to really properly, because you really do need to learn how to properly resolve negative emotions, which is what we pride ourselves in being able to teach at Upgrade in the most incredibly fast way. I can't even exaggerate it. It's extremely fast. As you resolve negative emotions, this technique will aid you further in feeling more relaxed. But before you learn that technique, and even as you're learning it, you need to learn to expand your visual horizon. I'll end with this, if I may.
Please.
One of the saddest things I've ever heard when I ask someone, what do you want? One of the saddest things I've heard from these successful entrepreneurs, these business owners, these ballers, is, I just want to be happy. I'm like, what does that mean? And they can't tell me. They're like, I don't know. Just that feeling, I get it when I get it. I'm like, so you're chasing this thing that you have no idea. They're like, no, I'm not chasing. I just want to be happy. I'm like, so if you gave me everything that you own and you found happiness, would you be okay? And they always are stuck on that. They're like, what? I'm like, no, you don't just want happiness, right? But the reason I said it's one of the saddest things for someone to just say, I want to be happy, it has more to do with happiness being a state that they can control and generate. And if they haven't figured it out by the time they're an adult, that they can actually be happy regardless of circumstances, I don't know what to tell them. This is something, it's as ridiculous as saying, I just want to breathe. I can control that, right? Happiness is a state, and the money, the wealth, the success, the relationships, the everything else is everything else. It's not an internal state. It's not an internal state. So an internal state we have full control over. The external state, well, requires some training. So if a very successful entrepreneur tells me, I just want to be happy, that tells me a lot more about their ability to control their states rather than some cool, noble answer that some might think they're giving me.
That's a really good point. I think there was a man's search for meaning, right? It's Viktor Frankl's story. He was a prisoner. And you talk about this all the time. He was a prisoner in a Nazi camp. And the only thing he could control was his inner state. So he did. And there should not be a single human in a depraved, awful situation. Though sometimes it happens, but we're all safe and well. But if somebody in a concentration camp, one of the worst points of the war, can look inward, because what else are you going to do? That's a good point. What else are you going to do? Are you going to wallow and sit there and ruminate, or are you going to actionably take a little bit of control? And that's not to paint a broad picture on depression, on things that people do sometimes clinically have. But hey, if you've completely foregone or let go of the idea that you could have any input on that, that's a good place to start. You do have some input. And then from there, figure out the rest, one step at a time. But it's not zero. There's at least 1%. Sometimes you got to get a 1% gain.
Local therapy was literally that it came out of that. It's you can control your states, and your states is information delivery mechanism, right? And then, if someone's goal is to be happy, that's a misplaced or, it's an inappropriate usage of that word, goal. Goal needs to be something else, tangible, that's not a state. Because a state is something you can have infinitely and you can have it immediately. So
Heck yeah.
my point in saying all this, to sum it up, is that if you're having dark thoughts, your mind has a purpose behind that dark thought. It has a gain. It has something it wanted to communicate with you. And if you can figure out what that gain is and get a way of, find a way to achieve that gain, that outcome that you desire unconsciously or consciously, you can get rid of the dark thought. The dark thought is merely also a message delivery mechanism. We'll see you in the next episode.
Life is good and it gets better every day.
Subscribe and like and follow us. Share this with your friends who are having dark thoughts.
Send this to your mom. I don't know if she has dark thoughts or not.
Hopefully not.